David Gallo. I'm the head of the AIFC Academy of Law, and we welcome all of you to the Academy of Law webinar series. We're broadcasting here from Nur Sultan, Kazakhstan, and our distinguished speakers, who I will introduce momentarily, are both calling in from London, and we're very happy and thankful to all of those who are joining us here today. This will be an exciting seminar. This will be the first installment of a series of one-hour webinars, and they will include special guests from the AIFC Advisory Panel on Legal Regulatory Matters. Now, this is an area that is especially exciting for us because our speakers have really been there from the beginning as we were establishing the infrastructure of the AIFC. We required the input and ongoing engagement of globally recognized experts and specialists in the areas of legal service competencies, as well as compliance with appropriate regulatory standards to make sure that the legal profession maintains its global reputation of high quality and integrity. So the title of this series is the Fireside Chat with the Experts, Legal Considerations Arising from the COVID-19 Crisis. And the first installment today, and this is the first of four, as I mentioned, is on the topic of changes in legal practice caused by COVID-19. We have two distinguished guests from the AIFC Advisory Panel. They are Mr. Crispin Passmore. Crispin's a member of the panel. He has been involved from the day of the panel's creation in 2019. Crispin is a regulatory strategist in the world's most dynamic and forward-looking regulatory environment and legal market, and that is under the laws of England and Wales. As executive director at the Solicitors Regulation Authority, Mr. Passmore has rethought regulation so that innovation and high professional standards can be combined to drive new entrants and economic growth. Previously, Mr. Passmore helped set up the Legal Services Board as the effective deputy to the CEO. The LSB was created to change the way that legal regulation operated. Our moderator on today's event, and he will also be the moderator on the next three webinars in this series, is Mr. Christopher Kenny. Chris is the chairman of the AIFC Advisory Panel on Legal Regulatory Matters. And again, he was there from the very beginning. After a career in central government, the insurance industry, and regulation, most recently, Chris was the chief executive of the Legal Services Board. He took over as chief executive of MDDUS at the beginning of 2015. Chris Kenny undertook a number of consultancy projects, including reviewing the Financial Ombudsman Service, and helped implement the Legal Services Act of 2007 by establishing the Legal Services Board, of which he then became the inaugural CEO. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chris. Just a couple housekeeping rules. Your microphones should be turned on mute so that we don't have any background noise. Christopher Kenny will lead the questions, and Mr. Crispin Passmore will be responding, and that dialogue will ensue. Now, at the end of the event, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. You can see you have an icon at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and activate that icon. And my colleague, Mr. Almas Zumashev, will call on the respective individual, and Mr. Almas will be able to activate your microphone, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, so with that, let me turn the floor over to Mr. Chris Kenny. Chris, please.
David, thank you for that very nice introduction, and welcome everybody. It's good morning in London, good afternoon, I know, in Nur Sultan, but it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you. I should, I think, begin with an apology that Crispin and I are here slightly under false pretenses, because of course David heads the Academy of Law. The talk is headed Changes in Legal Practice. We're not actually going to talk that much about the law and about legal practice. Instead, we're going to be talking about the legal industry and strategy and law firms, and in particular, how the current environment is affecting them. Crispin's going to kick off by talking for 10 minutes or so, looking, first of all, at what the state of play is in relation to the virus and how far that's beginning to expose structural issues within the legal industry, and perhaps throwing up some wider issues which should make in fundamental tenets of the way the legal industry operates be questioned for the first time. And then I go on to much more interesting part of the discussion out of that. What's the nature of the firms who will do well? What's the nature of the firms who may well suffer? What level of change are we going to see in the long term? We're going to try and run this as a bit of a conversation. So Crispin will talk for 10 minutes. We'll maybe then discuss for 20, 25 minutes among ourselves, and then have about the same amount of time for questions at the end. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Crispin, the floor is yours.
Very much, Chris, and David, for the warm welcome. It's an honour to be working with the AIFC, the Legal Advisory Panel in Nur Sultan, and to have so many people keen to engage with Chris and I and other speakers in this series. The global pandemic is of itself a terrible thing. In excess of 4 million people have now been infected, and almost 100,000 deaths have occurred across the world. By any measure, that is terrible, and almost no country is exempt. Japan has seen 5,000 infections and more than 30 deaths. In the UK, where Chris and I are, it's been much more difficultly hit, much harder hit, with over 33,000 people dead so far. And we're not through this yet. While many countries are seeing a decline in the number of daily infections, there is as yet no clearly mapped path that can guarantee the avoidance of this re-emerging and a second spike. We do not know how long restrictions on our way of life and economic activity may continue, but it seems to me that 2020 is going to be a very tough year, and 2021 may not offer as fast a recovery as we would all like. And with that background, it seems trivial to think about the impact of all of this on lawyers and the legal market. But that's our task today, and it does matter. Lawyers are crucial in so many ways to our societies and economies, none more so than in a crisis like this. Lawyers are, of course, crucial in resolving personal disputes, whether that's a divorce or a relationship breakdown, housing disputes, debt issues, and much more. They underpin the operation of our small businesses. The life cycle of a small business, from setting up a small company through its various life events, renting property, taking on its first employees, investing in equipment, selling online, cross-border trade, all of these things are more easily faced by a small business with the help and support of lawyers. And of course, the smooth running of national and international trade, the operation of our corporate entities, the delivery of goods and services across the world, the provision of food around the world. This all requires lawyers to facilitate, support, and protect financial and trade activities. Lawyers are, of course, a crucial part of the global economy. And that matters now as much as ever. Even during this global pandemic, we still live in an interconnected world. For example, 80% of the world's population gets some of its nutrition from food grown in another country. Even with lockdown, trade matters. And it's the legal markets of London and New York that are at the centre of that global trade. But increasingly new centres are emerging that are building local, regional, and global capacity of the legal market to facilitate our economy. The AIFC in Nur Sultan is one of those emerging centres, and you all have a part to play in that. The legal market has been hit hard by the lockdowns that have been in place to a greater or lesser degree across much of the world. Let's look at the UK just as a start to see how that's playing out. Most of the UK's courts are closed. Some are operating online, at least for case management and preliminary hearings, and perhaps a few more complex hearings. But the core work of litigators and advocates is severely hit. The Bar Council says that the barrister profession is on a knife edge. 55% of its members will survive only 3 to 6 months. The Law Society, which represents law firms, suggests that more than 70% of small law firms face closure within the next 6 months. Our corporate and global law firms are furloughing staff and talking about significant drops in new instructions. They are delaying partner distributions. They are delaying bonuses and cancelling pay rises. Many are now considering redundancies. Many lawyers are fearful for their jobs. Everyone who can do bankruptcy and insolvency work is being rebranded to that area. Much other work has simply stopped. For corporate clients, litigation, strategic decisions, business developments that seemed crucial just 3 months ago are now sideshows, and they're often parked, perhaps even for good. The pattern is uneven, and that is something that we might explore in discussion. I'm interested in your views on sectors that are well placed to survive and even thrive, the types of law firms and legal businesses that can weather this storm. So please do comment and ask questions either in the chat function, putting up your hand, so that Chris can feed them into questions and we can have a really good dialogue about what is happening. But I do think there is some hope for lawyers and law firms. Let me say why. First, let's look back at previous recessions in developed economies and the impact on the number of solicitors. Again, let's use England and Wales as an example. The number of solicitors has grown every year since I first saw records starting from 1950. Back then, there were 20,000 solicitors or less throughout that decade. But as the professional services industry grew in the 1960s, the number of lawyers started to rise. It rose through the global oil shock and the deep UK recession in the 1970s. It rose through the deep recession of the 1980s as the financial services industry grew and became global. It grew through the dot-com bust at the start of this millennium, and I think quite amazingly, the number of lawyers grew again through the global financial crisis 10 years ago. There are now 150,000 practicing lawyers in England and Wales. Between 1980 and 2000, the number doubled from under 40,000 to 80,000. With that pattern of growth, if we had told solicitors in 2000 that 20 years later, their number would have doubled again, we would have all have wondered, what on earth would they be doing? And in fact, we have another 50,000 lawyers on the roll who are not practicing as solicitors, using their skills, experience, and expertise acquired through their training and practice to be judges, senior managers, legal advisors, or elsewhere in our economy. My point is that we cannot really imagine the legal market 20 years down the line, but history tells us it is good to be optimistic in the long run. It's a good time to be qualifying as a lawyer. It's a good time to be developing legal practice. It's a good time for the AIFC to be developing Nur Sultan as a centre for legal services. What might make us have certain features that we can identify as causes of that optimism? Well, let's set aside the short term, at least until we get into the questions. We know that the next few months are going to be tough and many will lose their jobs. What about beyond that? What sort of law firms and legal businesses will survive and even thrive? I identify 4 features that I think underpin a strong future for law firms and legal businesses. Number 1, a strong balance sheet is crucial. We all know this, but it becomes stark in a crisis. A strong balance sheet ensures that firms are better placed to withstand disruption to billing, to payments, to cope when work dries up temporarily, just to weather the storm. How does that link to a firm's structure? Well, how easy is it to have a strong balance sheet if you distribute all of your profits every year to partners? Is a partnership even a good way of structuring a serious legal business? How does that compare to a law firm or a legal business that's floated on the stock market with major cash investment, one that's raised millions through external financing? Perhaps it's easier to build a strong balance sheet within a corporate structure. And while no structure is immune to the fallout of too much debt, poor investment, over leveraging, a partnership model built on overdrafts and bank credit lines appears to me to be inherently unstable. Feature number 2, tech-enabled firms have a head start. By this, I'm not thinking about artificial intelligence or super sophisticated technology. Let's just start with the basics. If you're a services business, and that's what lawyers are, and you're not able to work remotely, you're not cloud-based, then you are less resilient. Case systems, financial systems, document management systems, they should all be in the cloud. And those that had them in the cloud at the start of this pandemic have had a flying start. Those without it face real challenges. This isn't about being big or small. It's not about scale. Small businesses can run off-the-shelf software that is operating across our economies. Deploying Microsoft 365 or Google G Suite as the core of your business communications should not have been difficult. Tech-enabled firms were already using Google Hangout, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx to communicate across their business and with their clients. The alternative businesses that I talk to, those that are operating outside of the traditional law firm partnership, were already using basic technology to maintain distributed teams, coordinated globally across dispersed management teams. For these businesses, the shift into lockdown has been seamless in terms of internal communication. Tech-enabled businesses are also able to onboard their clients without face-to-face meetings. They can do identity checks, source of funds checks, as well as being able to take payments online. There's legal specific technology, as well as the generic stuff that our economy is built on. Firms that use technology to satisfy their customers' needs, be it contract management, creation of non-disclosure agreements, writing a will, handling a divorce, setting up a business, they are better placed through the lockdown and any partial easing. They are physically distant, but socially connected. Those that entered this pandemic with solid foundations are finding out that they provide a better customer experience, improve cash flow, and free up lawyer time to do actual lawyering. Thirdly, the role of specialization, or as I say, all eggs in a virus edible basket. It must be tough right now to be a law firm that only does property law. Add to that being focused only in a small geographical area, a town, for example, or relying entirely on your office as a route to getting clients. Businesses that come through this period strongly seem to me to be more likely to have a wider range of products and services to meet their customers' needs. That comes naturally from organising the business around your understanding of the customer rather than your understanding of the lawyers that deliver the service. This customer-centric approach drives the best legal businesses to have a broad service offer. They offer products, services, advice around the customer's issues. They are not bound by that lawyer specialisation. For clients, quality of legal advice is a given. Who would choose a lawyer or a firm that didn't know the law? But the best firms set themselves apart on accessibility, customer service, and their approach to pricing. They are focused on the tasks or jobs that their customers want done, rather than the areas of law they claim specialism in. They describe their services in the language of their clients' problems, rather than the language of their lawyers' training. And my fourth feature is understanding risk, or focusing on resilience. Good risk management is at the core about two things: clear lines of sight on risk and the resilience to take bigger risks. I'm not sure many traditional law firms have as sophisticated an approach to risk management as their size and complexity and client base warrants. Firms and businesses can be conservative on risk, but aggressive on opportunity. Risk conservatives maintain strong balance sheets, diversify income streams, deepen their relationships with customers, focus on value and excellence, and look for tech that increases productivity. They do this because it reduces the risk of failure, it increases their chances of success, and it provides a strong foundation for aggressively seizing opportunities. Those law firms that have those four features, I think, will be well placed to come out of this period of lockdown and this period of economic uncertainty and perhaps deep recession much better than those that are stuck in the ways of designing and delivering legal services of 10, 20 or 50 years ago. And I'm sure that we can explore together what sorts of law firms might look like that now and how different parts of the legal infrastructure are differently affected.
That's great, Crispin. Thank you. Lots of points there, I think, for us to pick up in questioning. Let me just pick up, Crispin, you started with England and Wales as a bit of a case study. Just say a little bit more about how far you think that experience is typical of other jurisdictions, or if there are some other jurisdictions managing to cope better with the current crisis.
So I think it really depends what sort of work you're thinking about, and the sort of work that increasingly is being done in global financial centres, whether it's New York, London, whether it's AIFC in Nur Sultan or Dubai. This is a global legal market for corporate legal services. The clients are often cross-border, the clients are often global, and increasingly law firms need to be that themselves or be connected into a network that is So whilst there is some variation, I think, which will depend on the level of lockdown, the scale of the pandemic in different countries, I think the legal market across the world is hit. Cross-border transactions are down. We're still working hard, I think, in most economies to facilitate essential cross-border trade in food, medicines, and personal protective equipment and the such. But I trade in all sorts of other areas. Global supply chains really are hit. Those supply chains coming from China into Europe and the US, for example, they have been hit. And that means that the legal services connected to that are also hit. I don't think there's an even pattern within law firms. I think some law firms are coping much better, but I think that the next few months will see a quite serious shakeout amongst those that have managed to keep their problems quiet in the last weeks. But I don't think there's many parts of the global legal supply chain that are not really touched by this at the moment.
So is the health of law firms then been more determined by the sectors which they serve and the underlying health of those sectors than by what the law firms are doing themselves?
I think that's inevitable. In the UK, the number of houses being bought and sold has just fallen to close to zero. So if you're a lawyer that specialises in residential property transfers, then you've got no clients and there's nothing you can do about that. I think if you're involved in global supply chains for technology or car manufacturing, there's nothing much you can do about the fact that those supply chains and your clients are heavily disrupted. But I think how resilient you are to your clients' disruptions is something about a feature of that law firm, whether or not you as a law firm have the strong balance sheet, whether or not you focused only on one part of the economy. Do you only work with financial services institutions? Do you only work with manufacturing institutions? The broader your revenue base, the more you've got of having at least some clients that are continuing to work and continuing to generate work for themselves and work for you as a law firm.
Just say a little bit more, if you would, building on that, really about client expectations and the extent to which we're seeing those change as well.
Yeah, well, I think this is something that's been going on for a long time. I think it's easy in times like this to think, the world will never be the same again, and this is a revolution. And as you and I discussed many times, Chris, people overemphasize, perhaps exaggerate the short-term impact of these sorts of issues, but probably underestimate the long-term impacts. We've seen a gradual change in the way that general counsel in corporate clients their role within their business and how that feeds into how they buy and consume legal services. So we've seen the growth over 20 years of what's insultingly called alternative legal services providers. I prefer to call them enterprise legal service providers. So businesses like Elevate, Axiom, United Lex, the big four accountancy firms, increasingly moved into the legal services market to deliver not what law firms would recognise as bespoke legal advice, but to do contract management, contract review, GDPR compliance, LIBOR compliance, a whole range of different things, often on a global basis, with tasks that the GC wants done rather than simply give me legal advice on this. And GCs have been shifting how they buy that sort of work, I think, for 20 years or so. What's happening now is that they need advice urgently. They're needing to furlough staff. They're trying to work to stop the business hemorrhaging cash and manage a bunch of risk. GCs are often chief risk officers in corporate clients as well. But they need this fairly routine work done, hugely important in terms of changing staff or checking all their contracts for force majeure clause. And they need it done and suddenly they haven't got any money to pay for it. So they're looking for value. They don't want gold-plated advice. They want proportionate advice for the money they've got available and the task they need done. I think is driving them to think differently about who they buy from and how they consume legal services. And law that say, well, we can do that. Let's start with a blank sheet of paper, go and look up the law. well, they can't move fast enough, they can't do it at scale fast enough, and actually it's just a very expensive way of producing. It's like a pre-industrialization form of production, whereas the are using technology, systemization, a mix of lawyer and non-lawyer management to answer their clients' needs, not deliver legal advice, but answer their clients' needs scale at pace at fixed and certain pricing.
And what struck me as you went through your 4 characteristics of firms that might survive is that's almost a procurement template that a general counsel might use. And I've got one story at the moment, actually, which is quite interesting. In my day job, running effectively a small insurance company, we own a portfolio of commercial property. One of our tenants is a niche multinational firm specialising in overseas financial centres. They've come to us asking for a rent holiday because they're finding it difficult to manage their cash. I'm afraid, as their landlord, I know how much money their partners took out of the firm last year. And I don't quite see why my bottom line should be hit by their inability to plan for the future. And I'll tell you something else as well. We do some business in overseas financial centres. I've been thinking of potentially trying them out as somebody who was close to hand. I'm not now because I don't feel I've got a guarantee they're going to be there for the future. So, I mean, this isn't actually about just the individual firm planning for their future. It's about building a long-term client relationship into your own risk planning, because clients will increasingly be looking in a sophisticated way, not just are these lawyers clever enough to be able to do the work I want, but are they a partner who I can be sure is going to be there with me in tough times for them as well as for me. It has really been built into much strategic planning before.
I think that's right, Chris. And I think one of the things that's been, I think, almost revealed through this last few weeks is that our ideas of what counts as strong and stable have been upended. If you look at the flexible lawyering models and the alternative providers across the world, Elevate, Lawyers on Demand that operates Australia, Singapore, the UK, Germany, Elevate across the world, Axiom across the world, they're all still recruiting. All traditional law firms are furloughing staff and reducing their workforce. Got strong balance sheets. They're seeing this as an opportunity to grow their workforce because they're offering what their clients need in a time of crisis. And even if it's very difficult to be profitable during these few months, they're building long-term relationships with their clients through these few months. I think general counsel are going to come out of this of being fearful about switching from traditional law firms to alternative providers. They're going to be fearful about the stability and the strength of the partnership model. They'll be looking at people's balance sheets and saying, well, to form a long-term relationship with you, a long-term commercial relationship, your balance sheet is no stronger than a startup. I think actually I'll work with this private equity-backed business or this stock market business that has a really strong balance sheet and access to capital in times of crisis, and fixed and long-term pricing models that are dependent upon the way the wind blows at a particular time. So I think it's really upending things. I don't think that means a revolution. I think these are drip changes, but I think that's one feature of those changes.
Okay, can we just turn to legal tech? You half quoted one of my favourite lines I picked up when I was a telecoms regulator, that everybody overestimates the impact of technological change in the first year and always underestimates it over a decade. I always wondered at the LSB whether law was going to be the big exception to that rule, because our colleague, whose work I hope many of the people on the call have read, Richard Susskind, seems to me to have written the same book about 5 years, saying that there's a step change about to come in legal enablement, and somehow it hasn't quite happened. Do you think COVID-19 is going to be the absolute tipping point that shifts what's still an adventurous model for some firms into being the norm across the sector?
So I think the thing about the future, as just as a concept, and I think this hampers people like Richard, is that it's all scary and speculative until it happens, and once it happens, it's routine. So, if we think about the use of the deployment of really sophisticated artificial intelligence into the legal market, it's all scary and risky, and it's artificial intelligence until it's actually deployed, and then it's just routine. When you have Siri on your iPhone or Microsoft Office offering to sort your emails into different groups with automated workflows, that's based on artificial intelligence. But because it's built into products we use every day, we just think it's routine. So actually, I think there has been really significant change. Richard's first book, 1997, I think it was, predicted that emails would become the main way for lawyers to communicate, and he was ridiculed. It just wasn't a suitable form of communication for lawyers that worked at a different pace to what was inane, instant discussion. And it turns out actually lawyers can use email. So I think change happens, but I think we discount it really quickly. And lots of the change that happens gets incorporated into our ways of doing things that we currently do, rather than upending them. And you only see the things that are upending a little bit too late. So you mentioned your favourite quote. My favourite quote is from a Hemingway book, The Son of Roses, where asked about how he went bankrupt. A character says, I went bankrupt and then suddenly. And I think that's how change happens, that we see lots of things that appear to be gradually changing, and we think, well, that's okay. The point at which you haven't got a business anymore is something very sudden, even if with hindsight you can see 5 and 15-year progress leading up to that. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is these alternative entrants to the market across the globe. No one's exempt, no regulation can keep them out. We are seeing them bring in technology and working practices and marching up the value chain, and lawyers are making what they think are strategic decisions, but in fact all they're really doing is retreating up the value chain, abandoning work that was how they trained their workforce, that they built their future partners on, and they will become smaller and they will abandon that territory to new entrants. Just like Netflix used to send CDs, DVDs out in the post to people in the US and the UK, and everybody thought, well, that's no threat to cinemas, that's no threat to television. Well, look at them now.
Now, you mentioned training, so let me ask you one last question on that before I open it to the floor. The impact on training and where lawyers of the future come from in this world, I think, is one of the most interesting features. And I was talking to someone a senior lawyer at one of the big 4 accounting firms in the UK, who said this was his only worry, that so much of the training he had in his own professional development and which he was giving to his team was effectively about sitting next to the expert, going out to client meetings, working absolutely day in, day out, being able to pass on tacit and implicit knowledge rather than simply being able to correct work. And he worried enormously that kind of education and training by socialization was going to be threatened by remote working. And even if therefore you got a business model that could work in the short term, it maybe didn't have skill sustainability built into it, even if it had technology and financial stability. How far are people starting to grapple with those issues? And are you seeing solutions starting to emerge?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think the starting point to thinking about that is to think about what does modern and future legal practice look like? Do we need the same proportion of our lawyers as we used to be bespoke bespoke lawyer producers, legal advice producers in the way that he will have grown up with and trained with? And I suspect the answer to that is no, that lawyers are having to work as feeders of knowledge into systems and technology. And what it is to be a lawyer is gradually changing. And that's not a prediction for the future. I think that's something that's already happening. 150,000 solicitors practicing in England and Wales, 30,000 of them are already practicing in-house. They're practicing in clients where they work as in multidisciplinary teams. We have multidisciplinary practices. We have lawyers working in the big four accountancy firms. We have them working alongside all sorts of different professionals across the world, increasingly, and they need different skills. So you need to train for the world 3 and 5 years out and build skills and behaviours into lawyers rather than simply knowledge. The knowledge bit is easy. You can look up the law. What really counts is your ability to distill facts, your ability to apply judgment, your ability to work with others, because to distill facts and apply judgment, you need to engage with clients. You need to get behind documents. You need to be able to work with accountants, financial advisors. You need to be able to work with a whole range of experts. So, I think training of lawyers is gradually moving already away from teaching law to teaching legal practice, which is very similar to teaching all sorts of professional practice. It is about skills and behaviours and values, much more than it is, can you remember the law? What's the point of teaching somebody the law? Governments change law more often than ever before. So the law you learn through your training will be very different in 10 years' time. And certainly the type of work you do will be unexpected compared to what you think you're going to do during your training. So law firms are thinking about that. The big four are training people differently. I think some of the alternative providers, instead of just recruiting 5 and 10 year experienced lawyers, are starting to think about training their own lawyers, but they train them in a very different way. And in some ways, I think it's going back to a apprenticeship model, which I think delivers exactly what your colleague is describing. But it's just a very different environment and a very different set of skills and behaviours than perhaps lawyers were trained 50 years ago. And
that, I think, picks up what you were saying at the end of your talk about the need for customer and client centrality. Because at the LSB, and I can't remember if this was your line which I stole or my line which you stole, but we always used to say the number of customers who actually want law is really small.
Yeah.
Very few people want legal advice. What they want is a problem resolved.
Yeah.
And to resolve that problem, therefore, legal skills will be important for some of them, but actually sometimes it's much more about business judgment. It's about a wide range of knowledge about where the client's at, what its objectives are, and finding a way through it. And actually the unique legal input may well not be about knowledge, but it will actually be about the professional point of occasionally being bold enough and brave enough to say to a client to give them the advice they don't want to hear, because that's what they need to hear in order to protect themselves legally and ethically and financially. The legal point isn't about the knowledge per se, it's much about that ethical line running through legally based business advice as knowledge of a particular statute or a particular case.
I think that's absolutely right, Chris. And I think it applies at both ends of the legal market. I think it applies, if you're a global business and you've got, 2 or 3 tasks that you need, big tasks that you need done this year, you need your LIBOR contracts sorted out, you need your employment contracts standardized across different jurisdictions as much as possible, and your data security standardized across different jurisdictions as much as possible. Of course, whoever you go to needs to know the law, but what you really want is someone that can solve that problem for you. And at the opposite end, if you think about a better farm piece of litigation, you don't want a bespoke legal advisor that tells you competition law or regulatory law. You want someone who will say, I know this is the first time you've been through this, but I've been through this lots of times with lots of clients, and through all your options, this is the right thing to do. You know, people want your expertise and your judgment as a top lawyer, and they want your systems and your standardization for their routine stuff. The law and knowing the law is just a given.
Right, now I think we've got about 20 or 25 minutes to go. I've got one last question I'm going to keep on my sleeve for the end. But Almas, if you can take over hosting duties and let people in as they've got questions. I saw that Maxime Lord had his hand up some time ago. I don't know whether that's the right place to start. But any other questions, just stick your hand up and Almas will announce you, unmute you, and we'll respond, I hope, helpfully. Who'd like to go first?
Please, dear guests, raise your hand, then I will give you an access to turn on your mic. So, Maxime, please, try.
Hello. It's pretty nice that you remember about legal tech as far as fintech is all around actually right now. Well, what I wanted to ask is, you partially answered, but still, do you actually see right now or foresee that some software application or decisions are able to change the legal work in Kazakhstan or around?
That's a good question. I think we shouldn't race ahead of ourselves. You know, are we going to just put all our lawyers back out and work on farms because we can just ask questions of Google? No, I don't think that ever happens. I think technology is about how do we increase productivity, consistency, quality, customer service, rather than that, how do we replace? And in some ways, that's my point really about it's really hard to predict what lawyers will be doing in 20 years' time. You know, when I think about the mobile phone, I remember 20 years ago looking at how much telephones changed the way that legal services are delivered. And I remember showing slides, those of you old enough, of a Nokia 3310. So pre-smartphone, very small screen, just a few lines of text and nothing else. And you could make phone calls on it and nothing else. I imagined a world where you might be able to see on that tiny screen the face of your lawyer, and perhaps that's how you would access them. I could never have conceived of what would do to the way that we work and what we use our telephones for. That really it's just a computer that we have around, and that it's gradually building productivity tools. You know, that Siri runs my calendar. I don't need to tell it to notify me. Siri automatically notifies me of the things I need to know, the routes I need to take, what buses to jump on when I'm in London. You know, all of that stuff is built in. So I don't think technology it helps make legal services more productive. Do that, lawyers need to do a few things, I think. One, they need to get over the thing that they're special. They can use the same technology as all the rest of our economy most of the time. They don't need special technology. They don't need special case management dashboards. There are dashboards you can download off the internet to manage case flows. I think they also need to think about where do they get the capital to invest. Yeah, is the partnership model really a good vehicle for building investment in technology that has a 5-year payoff? I'm not convinced that it is. But I think there's lots of things like that. But in the end, technology will help lawyers thrive and will help them meet the needs of their clients and help them collaborate with their clients. I don't think there's any worry for lawyers that they won't have anything to do in the future.
I think there's maybe one other thing worth adding, Maxine, that one skill lawyers will need actually is to be a lot more inquisitive about the technology that they're using. Certainly in my current job, what I'm involved in is defending doctors and dentists when they're either in regulatory jeopardy or facing a claim. And certainly in the States, just slightly in the UK, we're beginning to see people now actually challenging doctors to say, well, you pulled off this diagnosis using this algorithm. How did you know that algorithm was searching the databases with the most up-to-date clinical protocols on them? So I think those lawyers who say, I can just buy a little bit of legal tech off the shelf without, and in a way delegate the work to the box, are going to have a bit of a rude awakening, because much as Crispin's right in saying your USP will be around the value add, the judgment that the technology can't add, you've got to be able to assure yourself and assure your clients that you're using the right technology, and it's not simply giving an answer really quickly in a gee whiz kind of way, but it's absolutely solidly evidence-based. And I'm not sure that many law firms actually are sophisticated enough in their purchasing habits to necessarily have that degree of security at the moment. Maybe the biggest four are maybe those who are working hand in glove with specialist developers are. I suspect there may be one or two who believe tech will solve all their problems, and they may actually just create new ones by being a bit naive about it. Okay, who'd like to go next?
I think it's down to you, Chris.
It's down to me. I can't see any more hands going up, but do please come in. Let me show some of my prejudices about the legal industry, Crispin. I mean, what's remarkable, I guess, about some of the longer established firms is how a very strange business model compared to most of the economy has managed to weather so many storms, whether it's oil price shocks in the 1970s, whether it's the financial destabilization of 2008. I sense that you're feeling a bit more optimistic, that we may be seeing secular change this time. Why do you think that, rather than things reverting to business as usual once the virus is under control in 12, 18 months' time?
So there's lots of things pushing in the same direction and in multiple jurisdictions. I think that the global financial crisis left a legacy. It gave general counsels a requirement really to do more with less. Yeah, their budgets were squeezed. They were expected to have less count. They were expected to think about technology, and they're expected to get value for money. So I think chief execs and finance directors started to put more pressure on general counsel, and that has carried on through 10 years of growth. And in the US, remarkable growth over 10 years up until the last 3 months. But that pressure hasn't gone. That pressure on costs hasn't gone. And that's some behavior changes amongst general counsel. I think that technology has started to mature. So the ability to collaborate using things like Zoom and Teams and WebEx, etc., has meant that your choice of where you buy has become much broader. That's meant that it's much easier to build really lean multi-jurisdiction businesses. So in the past, the only way to compete against big law was to open an office in lots of jurisdictions and recruit lawyers, often by buying a local law firm. You don't need to do that anymore. You can work on a distributed model with people working from home, flexible contracts, all sorts of things. And that's what Axiom and Elevate and Lawyers on Demand and United have all done. So it's easier to compete against law firms. It's easier for clients to buy differently, and they're under pressure to buy differently. And then on top of that, there's regulatory reform. Lawyers have had a monopoly. They got to decide whether anybody was allowed to compete with them. In many jurisdictions, it's been the case that it's unlawful to practice law if you're not a lawyer in a law firm partnership. That's just changed dramatically in the last 20 years. The UK has obviously been at the forefront of that, or England and Wales. Something like half of the new law firms created and regulated in England and Wales are now owned majority non-lawyer ownership structure. That's quite remarkable. Even in the United States, where there's really restrictive unauthorized practice of law regime, not only have we seen the growth of these enormous businesses like Elevate and United Lex, etc., but actually we're starting to see regulatory reform in states in the US. Arizona, Utah are leading the way. California State Bar is meeting in 5 hours' time to decide whether or not it takes the next step on reform. And several other states, DC, Illinois, Florida, Nevada, Oregon, Connecticut, they're all taking steps to reform as well. And if you've got the US, the UK as the two biggest legal markets in the world, liberalizing and allowing non-ownership, then capital and technology is already coming into those markets, and the clients are under, the number of businesses that want to take advantage of it, the entrance of the Big Four. We are ripe for change, but it's not going to happen overnight. Even now, I still think it's a 10, 20-year journey, and we will see lots and lots of change, but we will just adopt and discount that change as not significant, even if it is quite significant. Big law firms are not growing like they used to.
I wondered as well whether you might see a degree of judicial leadership in this area. Again, one of our colleagues yesterday was describing taking part in a 2-week case, all done exclusively online. And I must admit, I was in two minds about describing that. Partly, I think it showed and it illustrated the judiciary that things that would have been done in a very cautious way in the past could be mechanised. But absolutely, it was mechanising the way litigation currently works, rather than thinking, can we do it differently? If we've submitted 1,000 pages of evidence, why do we then need to be addressed orally for 3 hours explaining it? Shouldn't you do one or the other? I mean, do you think the judicial environment might change and help to embed change as well?
I'm sure that's right. And court reform has been something that has been discussed across the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, many jurisdictions over the last 10 years. The UK is something like 8 years into a court modernisation programme that has seen it shut physical courts and start to move processes online in some way or another. It's been painfully slow because judiciary is it's not recruited from the most forward-thinking, technologically parts of our legal profession, perhaps. Often the brightest, but not necessarily the most tech-enabled. And they've resisted some of that. But they're able, if nothing else, and they're pretty smart when faced with a crisis. And they have probably in the UK achieved more in courts modernisation in the last few months, the last 5 years, I would say. There's downsides to it. Has it just digitized what we do? I think that's an interesting debate. When you outsource and when you digitize, people often say, make it lean before you do it. I'm not convinced. I think sometimes the only way to work how to do it in the digital world is to move it online and say, well, let's just ruthlessly ask our questions about what bits still work and what bits don't work. And I think we're seeing a bit of both. But judicial leadership is crucial. You look into the US, you look into the UK, you look into other jurisdictions. Judges are saying this must be done like this and we must simplify our processes.
Okay, well, I think we're coming up to the end of our time, but let me just ask the audience one last time if anybody has any final questions. I don't think we have. So let me ask the final one, Crispin. You've set out a bit of a roadmap for the future. Where do you think the AIFC and Kazakhstan are in terms of rising to the challenges, both the individual participant in the AIFC and the jurisdiction as a whole?
So I think, future is really hard to know, especially before it happens. yeah, I think you go back and look at the nature of the way the world's becoming more connected. I mentioned earlier the statistic about where food from. You know, in 1970, before globalization really kicked off, most people ate food grown very close to their home, and lots of people didn't have enough. And we had something like I can't remember the numbers. It's something like 1 billion people were living below an acceptable poverty line at that point. And that has been transformed by globalization, because globalization has allowed people to trade and specialize. That is continuing, and I think it's remarkable how much we are all completely dependent on things produced, designed, built, grown somewhere else in the world. So what that means, I think, for somewhere like Kazakhstan is that, yeah, it has a choice, and it's had a choice about whether it wants to be a regional leader or not in the development of a regional economy. And it's clearly made a choice that it wants to be a regional leader, and it's invested in that. And the AIFC has an opportunity, and I think it's taking that opportunity, to not just be a place that improves more administration of justice, delivery of an environment for business to grow and thrive within Kazakhstan, but actually as a place for it to be a regional hub for all of the countries around it. That of itself is hugely significant. That is a huge opportunity. But you can go beyond that and say, just geographically, the scale and size of Kazakhstan and where it sits between China, Russia, Europe, where it sits on time zones. It's really well placed, not just for intra-trade within the region, but actually to connect that region globally as well. It's not in Europe, it's not in China, it's not in Russia. It can provide an independent, safe space for international trade from all of that. So I think the opportunities are huge. These things take time. It's not going to happen in 1 year or 3 years. It's going to keep going during that time. But the opportunities over the next 5, 10, 20 years are enormous. And what a good place to learn law and practice law and how that change.
Yeah, and if I can steal moderator's privilege to have the last word, I think that's absolutely spot on. Some of the debate around COVID-19 has been to say lots of industries are having supply chains threatened because they become too dependent on one overseas provider, quite often a Chinese provider. But some people in Europe are then drawing the wrong conclusion to say, actually, let's just stop globalization and go to a policy of autarky, of self-sufficiency. That never worked in the 1930s. It's not going to work now. I think, and one of the reasons I think we're enjoying working with the AIFC so much is, to us, the Kazakh government, I think, has registered that the way to build local prosperity and local expertise is to be open rather than to close the door. And I think everything that we've been talking about today absolutely illustrates that. On that point, I think I will draw things to a close. And David, maybe ask you just to say a few final words.
Yes. First, thank you very much, Chris Kenny and Crispin Passmore, for your insightful, articulate, and relevant comments today. They were truly enjoyable and outstanding. And thanks to our participants, please stay tuned. We have many more webinars coming up, including those with these two gentlemen. We're privileged and honored for your presence today, Chris and Crispin. So thank you very much. Please, to everybody, stay safe, stay well, as we collectively manage through what we hope is the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. So have a great day, everyone, and please join us again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.